The podcast daily just couldn't wait for Tuesday Media Day. We're already here. The Woody Hayes Athletic Center, ready to talk to the defense. Talking Tuesday, tackling Tuesday, Tennessee Tuesday. Whew, it's got it all. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We're going to hear from Jim Knowles and a handful of Ohio State defenders. So the focus will shift. Monday was for the offense. Today, which is Tuesday in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, it's defensive day. What do you want to hear from a side of the ball that really did its part in the Michigan loss outside of two plays that everyone is justifiably looking at? Gave up 13 points in that one.
Yeah, I thought did their part. I played well enough that Ohio State should have won that game, certainly, and has played really well since the Oregon game. And I think we probably came into this season wondering / expecting if this defense could be like the thing that gets Ohio State to a national championship, right? And maybe over the course of the year that evolved a little bit, but now that we're here and the offense is going through a bit of a kind of transition, I think we're back to like, can this defense actually, pull the wagon, so to speak, for Ohio State? So that's kind of what I'm wondering for Jim Knowles and the rest of the guys on this defense, whether or not they're ready like for that task. And their Tennessee offense is coming in. It's a good offense. It's not super high powered, so it's like an opportunity for them to set like a pretty good postseason tone, I think, for Ohio State too.
Yeah. So I mean to kick it off that way, just saying, well, that was good enough against Michigan on the 30th, because the challenge is not the same. And I think that Ohio State is going to have to match that same level of production and intensity, and obviously fine-tune some things. You don't give up another 3rd and 6 rush
for sure
when you have a guy in the backfield. Obviously some of that stuff can't happen. Tennessee is good enough to make them pay. But I wonder, so you and I have talked a little bit, and like, well, there's maybe some things here that you take. They look like Penn State in this way, or they play like Oregon in this way. They are going to want to control the clock in a little bit different way. That's like want to do it with their rushing attack, which reminds you of Michigan, but obviously at a very much different tempo than what you saw. Like, I just wonder which one becomes more important for game planning for Tennessee, because they're a unique challenge, but they also have some limitations passing that makes me think, well, maybe this will be pretty manageable for Jim Knowles and those guys.
We've had this conversation before, right? When a team comes to play Ohio State and the thing that they do best is run the ball and they have like a stud running back, typically that doesn't go very well for that team because Ohio State just has the athletes to match that. But we're typically talking about like a Wisconsin or an Iowa and a team that's going to want to play the game in a phone booth, and that is not what Tennessee wants to do. They're still going to put their receivers way out wide. They're going to have more of a spread rushing attack. So that is a different animal. It's not your traditional, like line them up with 12 personnel, Big Ten rushing attack that Jim Knowles, I think, has done a really nice job of adapting his defense to when Ohio State has seen that over the last couple of years. So that is a unique challenge. You raise a good point there. I would couple that too with the tempo piece, because Oregon really stressed Ohio State by playing faster in that game, faster than it had typically before that and really since then. There were just too many snaps with guys looking at the sideline and defensive linemen not set. And it very much feels like Ohio State got some stuff figured out after that in terms of streamlining its communication. But this feels like the ultimate test of that. I don't know that Ohio State's played an offense that was going to really stress it out the same way that Oregon did. I'm not even talking weapons. I'm just talking pace and tempo. This offense will try to do that. Now, it'll be more difficult, I think, for Tennessee, assuming that they have to go to a silent count and that'll be pretty loud in Ohio Stadium on Saturday night. So maybe that'll help Ohio State's defense a little more. But that is like the biggest thing to me is, can you handle that? Can you get lined up? Can you get the calls in and continue to play as effectively and as efficiently as Ohio State's defense has played since that Oregon game? Because if it can, then I don't really know what Tennessee is going to do offensively.
Yeah, and I think you go back to Oregon as that inflection point and a lesson, whatever, that forced change for Ohio State, which is the way that it was calling the defense, communicating the defense, and then executing the defense from that point. The other part, of course, is that they were unable to generate any kind of pass rush pressure in that game. And I think that became the number one talking point. But probably what was more relevant was streamlining the lineup process, which is a little bit fitting in some ways, that if Ohio State learns that lesson and applies it against Tennessee on Saturday night, the reward would be you get to do it again against Oregon in the Rose Bowl. So are those lessons actually learned? Is it applicable for this week? The way that Dylan Gabriel was attacking and the way Oregon did in that game was more through the air than I think that Tennessee is capable of doing. But the same is true. You're going to have to line up. there is going to have to be some pressure on the passer, because I don't believe that Tennessee can just line up and run the football on Ohio State. I don't believe anyone is really capable of doing that over 4 quarters, which then, leads me right back to the conversation of we're having before Michigan. Are the corners going to be up to that mission? Because that's really, in my opinion, Tennessee's only path to victory is if they're able to make some plays through the air.
Yeah, and there's good athletes out there, right? Like it's a passing attack that is not maybe what you'd expected of a Josh Heupel offense, and Nico Imaliava is a young quarterback who's still very much growing in his game, but because of that, like the passing offense just hasn't really taken off. But there's still speed. It's an SEC team. So like that was the thing that gave Ohio State problems when they played Oregon, was just the pure speed, I think, of Oregon's receivers. So this will be a test for that. I with 3 weeks or about 3 weeks to prepare for this, I guess more like 2 once you knew who the opponent was. There's going to be opportunities, I think, for Jim Knowles to get pretty creative to try to confuse Nico, who again is just young and seeing a lot of things for the first time. So like it really does feel like, as long as Ohio State comes with like a pretty tight game plan and executes it well, that it should have the advantage when Tennessee has the ball. Like this is not, when this game popped up on the screen on that Selection Sunday, it wasn't like, oh boy, how's Ohio State going to slow down Tennessee kind of thing. It was much more about the flip of that, Ohio State's offense against Tennessee's defense. So this is, like I said, this should be an opportunity for a defense that statistically is one of the very best in the country, and I think for much of the season has played that way, at least in the back half of the season, to kind of flex a little bit and show who they are. And I think that starts with like making Nico feel it, like hit him, sack the quarterback, try to cause some chaos, and see if you can't get a young QB rattled in a fairly adverse environment.
I know how much some folks out there love when we get into the vibes.
Mm-hmm.
On Monday, when the offense was talking, they faced a number of questions about, hey, what were those meetings like the week after losing to Michigan? Like, how divisive was it, offense, defense? And Travion Henderson was talking about everybody coming together and they all had to say their piece. Like, I am, part of me is curious about what the silver bullet side of that conversation is like, whether they feel like, because of, we know what the potential limitations could be with the offensive line and revamping that, and coming off of a game where Ohio State scored 10 points, like, are they taking more, pressure on their shoulders? They want more pressure on their shoulders? Do they mind that? How are they communicating with the offense? Because there was also like that stretch late in the year where offense was standing on the sideline and cheering on the defense, and like, hey, everybody is coming together. And then they had that moment where it's like, ooh, that could be a real fracture there that might be difficult to heal. And I'm not saying that I think that that's the case, but I wonder like what the defensive side of that chat is like, because we already know what it is for the offense.
I think the defense can probably simultaneously feel like a little tick that it had played so well for the majority of the Michigan game and like weren't really helped by the offense, but also maybe feeling like, okay, well then it was just on us to close the door, and they didn't quite do it right. To the point of pressure, like they didn't sack Davis Warren in that game. The tackle you mentioned where they had Kalel Mullings dead to rights 4 yards in the backfield, and then somehow he got out. Like, it's not like they played a perfect game. So, I think they're aware of that. And while the expectation to be perfect is certainly a high one, like that comes with the territory at Ohio State. So they're not shying away from that. But I bet there was some back and forth about making sure both sides of the ball are picking each other up. I'll be curious to hear that from Jim Knowles. And I actually thought it was very interesting last week when the announcement was made. That was the first time we got to talk to Ryan Day after the Michigan game, that he was asked about the offensive game plan and his thoughts on the Michigan game. And the first thing he said was the defense played the way it should. Like the defense played well enough for us to win, and we didn't pick them up, which felt like a real tonal shift from like any other big game that Ohio State has lost, because Ryan Day, I think, has pretty quickly pointed the finger at the defense sometimes, and sometimes I think it's been correct, and sometimes maybe a little bit off base. But I thought he was right in that moment to say what he said about the Michigan game. So and then maybe that was just part of the process of kind of like bringing everybody back together. Not to say they were fractured, but just making sure they're on the same page as they attack this. And I think it feels like they are. Like, based off what Will Howard said on Monday, it seems like some of that got aired out. And I'm sure it wasn't just the offense; it had to involve the defense too. But yeah, it'll be good to hear from those defensive guys on Tuesday exactly how that went.
That is always a tricky conversation when you look at a game and objectively, one side let down the other. Like in Ohio State's 2 losses this year, like that's you look at the responses and the way that Ryan Day or the coordinators talk about it. Like, I know in that makeshift press conference tent in Eugene, I was asking Ryan Day if the offense had done enough to win that game. Some people were focused and blaming Will Howard for the lack of execution on the clock play, or myself, I'm wondering about the Jeremiah Smith pass interference call. But anyway, Ryan Day's response was that it was a team effort. The team lost the game. They weren't going to point any fingers, and that's the coaching cliche to do it that way. But when you have to go into the locker room afterwards, and one side clearly did the job that it needed to do, and one side did not, I don't think you can talk about it the same way. And doing that publicly, like, maybe you're going to do yourself a disservice when you're pointing fingers. But if you're also denying reality, then you're going to have to go back into that locker room again and be like, well, that's why I said it out there. Like, that becomes a different problem entirely.
I think it is good, though. You're right, it does. But I think it's good that they have probably what I consider the best example of sort of it all coming together, which was the Indiana game. And it's like the offense did not play perfectly in that game. Like, there were still some offensive line issues that crept up. But, like, to your point of the offense sort of like, cheering on the defense, and I think the defense like feeding off of the crowd, that was just like symbiotic, like this is what it's supposed to be like in a big game kind of thing. And they're going to have the opportunity, I think, to kind of strike that chord again on Saturday night against Tennessee. And Will Howard did mention that specifically, and to the point where, like, I wonder if that was actually talked about quite a bit, since the Michigan game. Like, can we get back to that kind of energy, I think, is the way that Will Howard described it. And if Ohio State can, then I think, I'm not saying beating Indiana does not mean you can beat anybody, but I think that version of Ohio State playing with that kind of fire, especially in its own building, I think can certainly beat anybody.
What are you most curious about, since it is a Talking Tuesday? Because you look at this group and the players that we're expecting to hear from, like, during a normal bowl season, you'd ask Sonny Styles, hey, which way you leaning on coming back? Like, this team could play 4 games. Are you going to have to get asked that before every single one of them? Like, I don't know.
I think, it is odd. I guess maybe if we get past this one, you start asking those questions at some of the more bowl type media days. I don't know. Like longer term, bigger picture stuff. I don't know that I'm focused on a whole lot. Like, I still think they need to get more out of the defensive line, like more production, tackles for loss, sacks, that kind of thing. Like, they have been more disruptive just generally as a defense, but a lot of it has been fueled by the linebackers and Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom. There's too much defensive line talent for that group to just kind of seem like it's a non-factor as often as it does. And it's not like, they weren't getting run over by Michigan. They played the run pretty well in that game until the very end, but you just want to see them in the backfield more. Like, is there a way to unleash some more of that now in the postseason? Now that Ohio State's back's against the wall and everything's kind of a winner go home situation.
I've tried to think about this in the way that Ohio State's success stopping the run is contingent on a healthy Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton plugging gaps. And like Jack and JT do that as well or better than any defensive ends in the country. It's like, well, you hear the mantra from Larry Johnson, and then Jim Knowles will echo it sometimes. Like, well, stop the run, and then you go get the quarterback. There's just this nagging part of me. It's like, have they been so hyper-focused on that they just skipped part 2? Because it doesn't – the sack numbers – and I know that that's not the only way to evaluate, and they're all quick to say, well, it's pressure, it's impacting the quarterback. Like, we know from the Oregon game that it is imperative that you get to the quarterback and bother him some, and that's still not happening, as you said, unless you're supplementing that with a Sonny Styles or a Cody Simon or a safety coming on the blitz, or we've seen corner blitz as well. Like, it just doesn't feel to me, and I don't really understand why they've been unable to get that.
I don't know. It's a little puzzling for me, and they're going to be playing against a defensive line that like really just kind of flies after you, right? So it'll be interesting to see this group on the field juxtaposed to Tennessee's defensive line in this game. Maybe there's something to it, like just be like, stopping the run first and being as stingy as Ohio State has been against the run has served them pretty well. So can you be both? Like,
that's the part
I think you can. Like, we've seen, well, I don't know, they were pretty good stopping the run in 2019, weren't they? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like they should be able to do both. For whatever reason, it's not quite hit. And I'm not trying to be like hypercritical of the defense necessarily, but I was looking for an opportunity for like Ohio State's defensive line to really take over the Michigan game that I never really thought came to fruition. And frankly, I feel like I've been waiting for that all year, and I don't know that it's happened. The defense has played very well in stretches kind of despite that. And even the defensive line has done its job quite well. I just don't know that it's like done anything extraordinary, over the course of the year. And it feels like maybe they should with the talent they have.
I think that's what I'm trying to figure out, because and the clock is ticking for that. They have been so good and so reliable, that defensive front, against the run. Now, sometimes not when they get into some of the sub packages, and there have been opportunities and teams like, well, I'm going to run right at that. And they have found some success. Multiple different opponents were able to do that. Like, am I guilty of taking that for granted and focusing on the thing that they don't do quite as well? And I just have not figured out what the right side of that argument is to be on, because stopping the run against Oregon, for the most part, not perfect, and not even one of their better outings overall, like, did not overcompensate for the fact that they were unable to get to Dylan Gabriel.
I understand the notion of like, you got to stop the run. I actually think the sport has changed a little bit, that it probably is more about getting after quarterbacks more than anything, unless you're playing Iowa, but they're not playing Iowa because Iowa's not in the playoffs. So maybe, and I'm not suggesting that they're going to suddenly like willingly give up a little more against the run, but I think the playoff might call for something a little different than what most of Ohio State's season called for. So we'll see what they put out there on Saturday.
All right. Anything else on your mind?
No.
Okay.
I think I'm good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm glad you've got it all figured out.
I don't have it figured out.
That's what I need you here for.
I just want to watch them play
on a talking, tackling Tennessee Tuesday on the podcast deal. Yeah, we're one day closer. We're going to get to see them play again on Saturday night against Tennessee, 8:00 ESPN. Well, 8-ish,
approximately 8:00.
Probably going to have to kick that back a little bit. Yeah. Get comfortable.
That's right.
On Saturday night, but it's Tuesday, and we are going to hear from the Ohio State defense in a little bit, and we're also going to have an open practice window for the first time since mid-August. Right out there, practicing outdoors.
It's gonna be the end of practice, right?
I think it's the start of practice.
Oh boy!
Yeah.
All right.
So get the binoculars out so that you can scout, because they're gonna, they'll move everything that's relevant way over there, over by the shop.
Yeah.
Not by
the
us.
Offensive line's gonna be in the shoe. We're wearing the water.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's a toughness Tuesday as well. You got to stay outside and get ready. But looking forward to that. We'll have snap judgments afterwards, so that will not be coming right on the heels of Ohio State's defensive media day. We'll also be at Roosters. So there's a ton of coverage all week long as we get ready for the college football playoff first round game in the Horseshoe. He is Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us so much on the Podcast Daily. See ya.